Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Christopher Young. For almost 4 decades, legendary composer Christopher Young has scored big in basically every genre there is. From his innovative horror scores such as Hellraiser, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, to thrillers, dramas and action movies such as Copycat, Jennifer 8, Hard Rain, Murder in the First, Urban Legend, Swordfish, Shipping News, Spiderman 3, Ghost Rider, The Exorcism of Emily Rose and Sinister, Christopher Young always hit the right note. Bottom line, he's one of Hollywood's most versatile and best composers that knows how to captivate an audience. Most recently, Chris worked on the second adaptation of Stephen King's horror novel Pet Sematary, which premiered on April 5th. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I'm thrilled to be here. This is awesome. Bravo. Thank you. Thank you
for joining me. Chris, before we dive into Pet Sematary, I would love to ask you a couple of other questions, and I would love to know how it all began for you and when you decided to become a film composer. As I understand, you moved to Los Angeles in 1980, and maybe you could give me some insight on that.
Yes. I fell in love with film music at about the age of 18. I'm from New Jersey originally, on the shores of New Jersey. Born in Red Bank, which is the hometown of Count Basie, but not far from Asbury Park, where if you mention the name of Bruce Springsteen, everyone gets down on their hands and knees and bows their head. He's super famous there. But I fell in love. I fell in love with film music, not really being a film fan per se. I was just discovering instrumental music. I had spent my childhood listening to songs on the radio. Basically it was the 3 Bs, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, and the Byrds, and all things pop. I didn't really know that orchestral music existed. And it was by chance that I picked up an album called The Fantasy Film World of Bernard Herrmann. It contained a suite of his fantasy film scores, including Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and Fahrenheit 451. I dropped the needle on that and fell madly in love with what I was hearing, became obsessed with his music and wanted to know as much as I could about him. And that took me down the path to paying attention to film scoring. I think the film that I saw in a theater, Michael, that changed everything for me, that must have been out around that time, was The Wind and the Lion, scored by Jerry Goldsmith. And I remember going into the theater in Red Bank, New Jersey, the hometown of Count Basie, the same theater that I used to go see the James Bond films when I was much younger, and really paying attention to the score. And there was a handful of cues in that movie that just made my jaw drop. And I realized right then and there I was making a real solid connection. I didn't know why or how, but I just knew that this was something that had to be. So from that moment on, it became a fixed idea on my part to make it out to Los Angeles. Being young and naive, I didn't know any better. I knew the competition was stiff, but that didn't make any difference really. So by the time I came out here in 1980, I'd never written a cue for a movie. I'd only written a handful of pieces of music that were, played by ensembles, the largest one being for a concert band and a couple of big band charts. But most of the stuff was small combos, instrumental music for the jazz band I was playing in because I was a drummer. And I'd written some vocal music, but that was about it. Never a film. I'd read about it. I'd listen to these records, watch these films on television or revival theaters, and just had a mad addiction to it. And that's what brought me out here.
Jerry Goldsmith is a great example. I could probably talk about his music forever, and there's a great example he mentioned, the wind and the line. So it's it's great to follow into Jerry Goldsmith's footsteps.
Yes, yes. There was a period of time there where I was kind of obsessively pursuing his music. I mean, yeah. I mean, I have a gigantic vinyl collection of film music, as well as 20th century classical music. That's even bigger. But in the film music section, you know, I have dividers. Like by a composer, and you can tell which one's Goldsmith because it's so it's like takes up a whole shelf. I mean, I'm talking like multiple copies of certain scores. So yeah, I really adored his scores from the 60s to 70s and and throughout most of the 80s.
Great.
I just thought that they were textbook examples of exactly what to do with a picture, scores based on one or more very strong themes that he then took through variations in the best of ways, always melodically driven, always there was like a clarity and a logic to the development of all of his ideas, which were like no one else's. And I just connected with it. You know, next to Herman, I would say Goldsmith was the one that I probably learned the most from, you know, by listening.
Chris, when you look back at your own career, which started in the 80s and when you scored Hellraiser, Nightmare 2, and also The Fly 2, what do you remember of those days, the scores, and how you found your own musical voice?
Well, you know, finding your own musical voice, that's something that every composer can spend a lifetime trying to figure out. Now, I feel honored and lucky that you believe I found my voice. There is a diversity in the films I've worked on. My head thinks in a multitude of different languages, and I'm lucky, I guess, that I can do that. I remember one time I was very haunted by that, feeling like, wouldn't it have been better if I just kind of focused on one kind of path and developed a voice that was just of that one style, you know, as opposed to, you know, being able to write in such a variety of styles. I remember having a conversation with Elmer Bernstein about that, and he told me, Chris, no, you should feel damn lucky that you're able to think in a multitude of languages. He said, that's precisely what I chose to do when I started my career. It was, I'm not going to get pigeonholed to do just one thing. I want to do a diversity of things. And that's what he did. He did a diversity of things. Now, when I listened to Elmer Bernstein doing westerns or doing dramas, doing comedies, doing film noir type movies, it's a different language, but I still hear the same guy. I don't know if that's the case with me, but if you believe that there's something there, then I guess I need to start believing that there's a continuity from genre to genre. Now, in terms of when did I start really developing my own voice, I think you're right in saying Hellraiser was probably the turning page. Nightmare on Elm Street, I think I was still trying to find my voice, but it took Hellraiser. It was the perfect scary movie to work on to enable me to solidify the kind of direction I've been, testing the water with. The nice thing about Hellraiser that wasn't the case with Nightmare on Elm Street is that it's really my kind of horror story, in that it's at its heart it's a tragedy. In the case of Nightmare on Elm Street, it's just about a killer on the loose, and we don't really feel that much for anyone in the story. I mean, we kind of do, but it's more like your classic slasher movie of the highest caliber. Very, very imaginative. This idea of this murderer appearing in your dreams is remarkable. But in the case of Hellraiser, it was about a sad woman who was madly in love with an abusive brother to her husband, that she was willing to go out and kill people to bring him back to life. So it's a real tragedy, you know, a very sick love story. And that seemed to be the right kind of a movie to come my way at that time for me really to make the music more personal than I was able to in Nightmare on Elm Street. After Hellraiser happened, all of a sudden I heard from those around me, "Oh, that's your sound, that's your voice." And I went, I said, "What part of it's my sound and my voice?" "Well, you know what you do with the strings." And I go, "And what is that I do with the strings?" And they go, "You know, that high stuff you do with the strings." And I go, "Which high stuff?" And then they would, you know, I don't know. I mean, apparently there's something that came out of that score that seemed to be me. Of course, when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking that. I was like struggling, probably trying to be like Herman or something like that, you know. But I guess from that moment on, it's been a process of growth, you know, developing my voice in a variety of genres. I guess in scary movies, it's more developed because I've done more of them. I haven't done enough dramas. I've done a handful of dramas, maybe 6 or 10, maybe 10 dramas. And, you know, if that had been my mainstay, I'm sure my voice in that genre would have developed into something different, you know. I guess my point being that depending upon what genre you get typecasted in, or you get most of your calls in,
yes,
chances are that's the voice that you're going to be developing or focusing on. You will be focusing on that voice, so you've got a better chance of that developing and becoming something that's uniquely your own over time. I'm going to end this by saying, you know, even when you're trying to reproduce the music of a hero, you know, you're letting your hand be held by using as a reference an example or a cue from another composer who's your hero, as every starting composer does. Chances are it's going to come out sounding like you somehow anyway, you know. Whatever that might mean, we make our choices, if not consciously, subconsciously. What is it that we like? Well, we like this, we don't like that choice. We like the tune going there, not there. We like the chords going here, not there. Even if we're trying to base it on a favorite cue by one of our favorite composers. We'll just automatically modify it somehow.
Chris, what do you think of today's approach of film scoring? Is there any aspect you wish were different? Do you think scores of the past, you know, be it a horror movie or an action movie, had more panache than today?
I'm going to say that again, and this speaks of my age. I'm not going to say that the scores of today are less valuable than the scores of yesterday. But I'm going to say that there are right off the top of my head, I can think of two distinct differences. And they have changed the course of film music entirely. And whether you think it's made it better or worse, it's your call. Only time will tell. You know, 100 years from now, who knows what we're going to think about the music of Max Steiner or Eric Wolfgang Korngold or Jerry Goldsmith or Bernard Herrmann. Who knows what we're going to think about my music, Hans Zimmer's music, my contemporaries' music. Who knows? And what about the scores that are happening right now? Only time will tell. But here are the main differences. I started in 1980. I moved out here in 1980. The home synth studio thing did not exist. It really did. No one had the money. Most synthesizers were a fortune. What were the two main keyboards that were around at the time? The Synclavier was one of them.
Yeah.
And I can't recall the name of the second one. Yeah, it was Synclavier and the something or other. And I'm sorry, but they cost a fortune. I mean, a real fortune. You had to be a superstar to be able to afford these things. So when I moved out here, I went to UCLA, and I worked with a lot of students on their short films. That was how I learned how to score pictures. And with those men and women directors, if they wanted an original score, by God, they had to figure out a way to pay for musicians to come in to play it, even if it meant just free pizza for lunch or something. So it was all done acoustically. And when you're writing for acoustic instruments, there's a certain kind of skill that's required that is a different kind of a skill that is required than if you're writing at the computer for synthesizers, and using, factory sample libraries. It's a different world. And so I would have to say that what's happened over the years since I've been here is the idea of synthesizers becoming the go-to ensemble for creating scores. The majority of scores these days are being accomplished by synths, home studio situations, in which the composer is also the performer. He inputs all the instruments at the computer himself, and then frequently has to mix it all and dub it all and produce the entire score on his own. When I started, that whole concept was foreign. I wrote it, I would maybe copy the parts at the beginning, but you had copyists, orchestrators, engineers, people who took care and had different specific tasks to accomplish that the composer didn't have to worry about. So that's changed. Synthesizer scores are the way now. What has happened over the years is that as synthesizers became more prevalent, composers started to write according to what the synthesizers did best. Instead of forcing the synthesizers to accommodate their ideas, they force their ideas to accommodate the needs of the synthesizer. And what does that mean? That means if you listen to most scores these days, they're kind of based around drones, low pedals that just go on for long periods of time. Harmonically, it's pretty stagnant. There's not a lot of room for harmonic growth if everything's hanging around a pedal. A lot of these scary scores are accomplished by using whatever ambient sound, pads that are in which pitches don't mean a lot. They're just textural entities that just hang there, or can stretch for hours. The thing about synth music is you can put your finger on a note and take a nap, and it'll keep playing it forever. I mean, until the power dies. Apparently, you could have a single note play for eternity. Whereas that's not the case with live musicians. They have to stop. They got to breathe if they're playing a woodwind or a brass instrument, a wind instrument. Yeah. So that's the major change. Composers are writing for synthesizers and what they do best. And what they do best is very different than what live instruments do best. It's changed the whole concept of harmony. Harmony has simplified itself. And more importantly, and this is the second point that I want to make, and that is the lack of melody. Melody has vanished as an ingredient of film scores. When I moved out here, if you didn't know how to write a melody, forget it. Pack up and go home. You had to really, seriously, you had to know how to write a catchy tune. That's what everyone wanted. That's what the directors wanted. That's what the studios wanted. They wanted a catchy tune that could identify their movie or their TV show with that tune that you wrote. And so, all great scores, really up until the synth scene took over, were put together by one or more very catchy tunes that the composer would then put through a bunch of variations.
Yes.
That's gone. That is pretty much gone.
Totally.
I would say totally.
For the most part.
I would say for the most part. I think Disney animated films, there's still place for tunes in those. Musicals, they're supposed to be, that's supposed to be a place for really catchy tunes.
Yes.
But not always anymore. So, yeah, tunes have gone. The idea of scores being held together by memorable themes is something of the past. Now the scores are thematicless. It's very hard as an audience and as a listener, I think, to be able to follow a score while you're watching the movie. Each cue seems like it's an entity into itself, almost as if it was written by a bunch of different composers. There's no continuity. There's no tying thread that holds an entire score together, other than the general sound of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I can totally understand.
So that's those are the two major changes, in terms of the composition. Salaries are going down, fees are going down. Ever since producers and studios became aware that composers could not only write and produce and mix and deliver scores from their home, they figured, Jesus Christ, anyone can be a composer now. So why do I need to pay? Well, I'm not going to pay very much. There's always someone out there who wants the credit, who will do it for free. So yeah, fees have fallen significantly. So those are the changes that I see.
And one more question before we dive into your most recent project, Pet Sematary, which I'm happy to talk to you about. I'm sure there are many fans out there that still ask themselves the question, will there ever be a score release of Spider-Man 3? You had worked as an additional composer on Spider-Man 2, and you had full composing credit on Spider-Man 3, directed by Sam Raimi. Could you perhaps tell me a bit about the circumstances surrounding this project and what you remember of working with Sam Raimi?
Well, I mean, being with Sam Raimi is what I couldn't ask for more. That's a dream relationship. I'm so entirely blessed that he and I have made the connection. It's kind of a miracle that it happened. I remember, seeing his earliest pictures. Oh God, I just went blank on the name of it. What was his first movie again?
Evil Dead?
Yeah, of course, Evil Dead. God, here I'm going blank, man. My brain is.
No worries.
I need to stick my finger in a light socket or something to wake it up. Anyway, yeah, Evil Dead. I remember seeing that film and went, holy Christ, this director, and I see him, I see his ideas. Oh God, I've got to learn I've got to figure out a way to get connected with him. Well, lo and behold, it did happen. It took years, and I remember chasing him down at first, but he wasn't interested because he had a great relationship with Joe LaDuca, who he still works with, who's a great composer. And so, yes, finally I got a chance to score the film The Gift, and that opened up the door. He was very happy with that, and it gave me an opportunity to work with him on numerous occasions, either as a composer, Spider-Man 2, those additional cues, Spider-Man 3, and Drag Me to Hell. As a composer, he produced the Grudge movies, 1 and 2. I did both of those.
Yeah.
Is there something else he produced that I did? I can't really remember. But suffice to say that that relationship has been fantastic.
Great.
Now, why about the CD of the score for Spider-Man 3? Chances are that's never going to come out. Never going to come out officially. I put together one myself that in case it was to come out. And I've seen, one of my side projects, I've been revisiting my old scores and trying to put the scores into concert-friendly suites. So I have both a CD layout and a concert suite version of that score to Spider-Man 3, but unfortunately the CD will never be, I don't think ever will be officially released. Danny got to do his own themes in the first two. And then after the third one, I think James Horner came in and did his thing, you know,
Yes. Then
and then
Zimmer.
Hans Zimmer came and did his thing, and I don't know who's been doing their thing. I haven't kept up with any of them since.
Michael Giacchino came in for one of the recent Spider-Mans, and then there's the
That's right.
another adaptation. Daniel Pemberton also wrote some music on that one.
Okay, so you know better than I do. I have not listened to them all, but you know, I have gone back and listened to that score. You know, to put this suite together, I was pleasantly surprised when I went back to listen to the score after so many years of having not listened to it. I got to write the Sandman theme and the Venom theme for that movie.
Yes.
And originally, I wasn't going to be writing those. Danny was going to be writing those, and I was going to be interpolating them somehow. But I got permission to go ahead and do my own thing on those, as well as the Aunt May and the Love theme. They again were not included in the initial release of the movie, but apparently, now I don't even have this, believe it or not, but a DVD or Blu-ray, Blu-rays come out recently, I think within the past year, of Spider-Man 3 that has the original score that I wrote for it, as it was intended in it.
Great. I really hope they're going to release it someday. It would make many fans happy, and let's keep our fingers crossed. It deserves to be released. It's a great score, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully somebody will pick it up. Chris, I would say let's dive right into Pet Sematary. Did you revisit the 80s version, or did you read the novel again? Did you revisit the original score by Elliot Goldenthal? How did you prepare to score this picture?
Mike, you may not believe this, but neither did I look at the original movie. Or I should say I started to look at the original movie and I said, you know what? I'm going to hold off on this. Why? Because I'd never seen it when it first came out, and I've never seen it in all these years. I had thought about seeing it, but I never had. I got the screenplay from Kevin and Dennis, the two directors, on this current version of Pet Sematary, and I started, I loved the script, and I started thinking about the picture in a certain way, as any reader will do, and started to hear music in my head. And I said, before I do this interview, again, it might behoove me to watch the movie, the original movie. Like I said, I started watching it, and I got into about 15 minutes of it, and I said, you know what? This is not what I'm imagining this picture is going to be about, so I'm going to stop watching it. So I never watched the film. I never listened to the score. As much as I think Elliot Goldenthal is one of the best ever, I do very much have tremendous admiration for both his film music and his concert music. I did not listen to this one. I started it and then stopped it. I stopped the film, and I hadn't heard the score on its own. I know his other scores. I do not know this one. And in addition, Michael, believe it or not, I never read the book. So I went into this movie having just read the screenplay that was the adaptation done by the directors themselves. It was their take on the story, anyway. And that was the guiding light. This is not an unfamiliar thing for me, though. When we were just talking about Spider-Man, I was embarrassed when I started working on the Spider-Man movies. I had to keep it quiet, but I never was a comic book guy when I was a kid. I never followed any of the superheroes. Spider-Man, I knew nothing about Spider-Man. I had to do my homework on Spider-Man just so I could have conversations with him, conversations with others about him that show that I had some kind of knowledge. I was too busy when I was a kid reading magazines like Creepy and Eerie, which were the darker, ghostier, more terror-driven magazines, comic magazines. So no, I come into Pet Sematary without any preconceptions, none whatsoever.
When you started writing your first cues, what exactly did you have in mind musically when you started working on Pet Sematary? How and when did you get, or how and when did you develop your first ideas?
Well, what normally happens is I watch the film, speak about it with the directors, get a sense of the direction they want to go, and then I walk away from the movie for about 10 days and start humming ideas into my cell phone. Anything that comes to my mind that I think is somehow connected to the picture without looking at it. So I just throw things out there. That's how it always starts. Not to picture, just letting it simmer inside the picture, simmer inside of me, and see how it turns into notes. And then, I then will do demos of what I think are the most important themes or sounds, and then I present them to the director. Originally, the concept of the score was that it was going to be more orchestral based. And so to that end, a lot of my original ideas were more, informed by that orchestral sound. And that's how we started thinking we were going to go with the score. Then the production team came in and they said, whoa, wait a second here. No. I think the score needs to be going somewhere else, more electronically. So indeed, there was a turnaround in the score, I would say, after being on the picture for like 3 weeks, 3 or 4, almost 4 weeks maybe. And so the score you hear today is not the score as it was originally conceived. Once the idea of going electronically was promoted, that was fine. I mean, I'm this whole electronic thing for me is a new adventure because 90% of everything that I had done, or I would say, nearly 100% of everything I'd done prior to Sinister was all acoustic based. Sinister was the first electronic, and I put that in quotations, score that I was able to do that was free of having any recording sessions connected to it. So, Pet Sematary was about trying to, once again, invent a whole new repertoire of sounds. I try to stay away from the factory sounds. I'm not a fan of that because it starts to kind of sound the same. Everyone draws from the same libraries. It all starts to sound the same. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, with this score, as you listen to it, you may go, I'm not sure if I like this, but I'll say for sure it doesn't sound quite like every other score I've heard. That's sort of always my main intention.
Chris, what do you think is the best instrument or the best sound to create musical tension?
What do I think the best instrument or the best sound?
Yeah.
It all depends upon the movie for sure. I mean, sometimes to create musical tension, you need everything plus the kitchen sink, times 1,000. You want up this big mammoth wall of sound that sometimes only an orchestra can get successfully. But other times to create terror, it can be done with such simple means: a single line, a single instrument, a single sound. We know that in the case of Jaws, for instance, all we needed were the cellos and the basses to play in a half step.
Yes.
Dee-dum, dee-dum. That's all that was needed to create incredible terror on the part of the viewing audience. So goes to show you, the nice thing about horror films is you can be very simple with your materials and get a lot of mileage out of it. I can't say in my own scores which I think is the best instrument that I've used or the best sound that I've come up with or the best melodic line that I've come up with that has created the most anxiety or terror. That I can't do. You'd have to help me on that one. But, we all try, I think, in the world of horror to come up with that distinctive signature, which can be as simple as that half step for Jaws, or the shrieking violins from the shower sequence in Psycho, or the simple repeated piano figure for Halloween, or the kill from Friday the 13th. Usually the most effective and terrifying things are simple gestures. That's something I've been chasing in my own stuff. Here I do a lot of horror scores, and yet there's not a single sound or a gesture that immediately comes to mind when you think of the movies I've worked on. That's probably the one thing that's missing in my output. That I know in Sinister I came up with something that I thought was going to be the signature sound, and I guess it did become the signature sound because I started hearing it used. That little sound was looped for theme music for for haunted house attractions and amusement parks. Even when I was overseas in Vienna at the Prater, which is their big amusement park there, I was walking and I started hearing that motive, that sound bite motive from Sinister coming from a distance. And I was like, oh my God, isn't this wonderful? And it turned out to be the theme music for that haunted, whatever they call it, the haunted attraction, the dark ride, a cart ride that takes you through, down dark corridors. So yeah, and Sinister, there's a specific sound. In Pet Sematary, yeah, there's a couple of sounds that I think are maybe distinctive. I keep on calling it this cello scream. I'd have to point it out to you, but when the daughter is on the loose at the end, there's this screaming cello sound, and that maybe is the distinctive murder motive. It's not really a motive; it's just a sound, and that appears a number of times. That's kind of it. I also write. I love including melodies in my spooky movies, and so did Jerry. Jerry was into writing melodies, and so was Herman. Herman would write melodies in his scary movies. Of course, the figure that Herman is best remembered for in his horror movies is the Psycho shower sequence. But throughout all of his scary movies, he also wrote tunes, as did Jerry. I don't think Jerry, talking about Jerry Goldsmith, I don't think he has that single defining sound for any of his scary movies. More importantly, it's the themes and the general sonority and the effectiveness of the score in general, rather than that killer motive. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Speaking of melody, you wrote a melody for Pet Sematary for the family, the lovely piano motif at the beginning, and then you used the choir to boot, and also the very effective, synth sounds. But how do you actually manage to not only accentuate the images on screen, but how do you create music that pulls the audience right into what happens on the screen?
If I do it effectively, it's only because I've had the experience. If you go and look at my earlier movies, I don't think I had the ability to do that as well as I do now. Because I've worked on so many scary films, and I think this is the single most important thing, I truly do love them. I love them and I hate them. It's like a classic love-hate relationship. But once I decided I'm going to start dating that movie, I fall in love with it, and I'm so excited by the prospect of trying to dig behind the image and find a musical language that truly will take the viewer to places that the picture itself cannot do on its own. And so I call it, diving into the picture and taking a journey beyond the image, into the dark world that exists, in the backdrop of every scene.
Yes.
Those kind of movies where a lot of it has to do with the unseen presence of this evil entity or evil force or whatever it is. Those are sometimes my favorite kinds of movies, because I don't have to worry about what's on the screen. I have to use the music to depict what isn't on the screen. That's why I love ghost stories. I love ghost stories because it's not on the screen, it's what's not on the screen that we're worried the most about, because ghosts, as a general rule, are invisible. That kind of answer your question?
Absolutely. And I would love to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule for episode 1 of our interview. I was really happy talking to you. It was such a privilege, and I hope you enjoyed talking to me too.
I loved every minute of it, Michael. I think you know film music extremely well.
Thank you.
I sure hope we can do it again on the subject of anything and everything that might come into your head that has to do with film music.
I would love to. I would love to connect again, do one more interview or several other interviews. And thank you again. And you have a good time. And I hope we talk